Hello, everybody. Thank you for the introduction, Marty. This is about persuasive language, both body language and word language. And so my cat is going to help me out a little bit because we are on the internet after all, so we need a cat, right? And this cat is trying to persuade you of something without even using words. And what's she trying to persuade you of? That you should have a pencil and paper. You can see that she's looking over there at that pencil and paper. So I thought the cat might not be enough to persuade you. So I brought this article. Actually, when I went looking for the photo of the pencil and paper, I came to this Forbes article. And so Forbes is a credible magazine. And I thought that they would have the authority to convince you that if you have a pencil and paper during a presentation, or a pen and paper, or colorful markers on paper, you can write things down and that will help you to remember. So the four threads that are going to go through our presentation today, because there's a lot to be said about persuasive language, and so I tried to choose what's going to be most compelling for technical people, obviously. First important thing, and I'm so happy we have people from around the world, because culture is a big factor in whether you find something persuasive or not. And that can even be culture, little microcultures, you know, whether you're talking to different groups of people within your very own city. How to please your audience is crucial for any communications at all, and certainly if you want to persuade them. Theories and examples of persuasion. We're going to look at some historical examples. And we're going to talk about not just word language, but body language. So of course, you know, we're delivering a lot of reports, emails, everything in words, but things like colors and the atmosphere that you send can also affect whether somebody finds something persuasive or not. So the first thing to think about, and the cat's coming to help us, I promise you she's only helping us for a few slides and then she'll go away. How does your team appear to clients? So right now we're all at home on our Zoom, so our appearance doesn't seem to matter as it would if we were in person all of the time. But if you are trying to persuade someone, how you appear matters. So imagine that the cat and I are a team here. And so first of all, the thing that you might notice is I'm looking directly at you, straight at you, and the cat is looking away. So if you're from some cultures, like I was raised in Alberta, and you're supposed to give a good strong handshake and look someone straight in the eye. And that's how we consider that, you know, that they're honest and they're forthright and that they're going to be good people to do business with. In other cultures, however, not looking people straight in the eye is considered more polite. So the cat, and she was a very polite cat, she might be trying to distract you by looking in another direction, or she might be trying to be polite. And I actually have two examples about this. One is, for example, I have edited papers from all around the world. And one interesting thing learning about editing Japanese scientific papers for the Western audience is that Japanese scientists often write their science beginning with, they talk about how they did things, all of the different methods that they used, you know, how the experiment went, everything right up until the end. And they don't tell you the reason for why they're writing all that until the very end. And so that is interesting. And that's not very good if they're trying to sell those scientific articles to a Western audience, because Western and Anglophone audiences often want to, right up in the abstract, we say, here's the experiment, here's why we did this research, here's the gist of the conclusion, and then they'll go into the details. So just that different cultural expectation can really change how someone perceives your science. The second example I have is a body language example, but good to think about. One of the first job interviews I ever went to when I was very young and hardly knew anything was an interview up on a reserve in Northern Alberta. And I was interviewed by the whole band council, and I didn't know this at the time. So I just walked into this large room of people, and the entire time that I was talking, you know, somebody asked me questions and I answered like you do in a job interview, 23 years old, very nervous. Nobody looked at me. The entire band council only looked at the table. And so I left that job interview absolutely persuaded that they hated me. And I was very surprised the next day to, you know, get a call and say that they really liked you. They really want to hire you. But unfortunately, I didn't know anything about culture, and they hadn't persuaded me that I would be comfortable in their society. So I didn't take that job, which now, maybe I regret, because I have gotten more educated about Indigenous culture. And I've also worked on a number of reserves across Canada and love working on reserves. So maybe I should have taken that job. But I would suggest to you, especially if you're working in Canada, this course from the University of Alberta is actually even free on Coursera. So Coursera is written right there, Coursera, or you could ask us later and I'll send you the link. And it's very nice that this Indigenous course is done by Indigenous people rather than, I grew up half a mile from the reserve and still didn't learn anything about Indigenous culture until I started working there myself. So I'm really happy that we have these tools about culture. If you were going to go do business in Japan, there's courses about how to do business in Japan. If you were going to go do business in Georgia, I know I've talked to some engineering friends who've done that and learned about the different cultural aspects of how you greet people and what's expected in business. So it's important. If you are going to be working with a group that you are not familiar with, learn about them. You won't be able to persuade them that you're worthy unless you start off by saying that they are worthy. So the mouse here is a very cranky client. He's not impressed with the cat looking off there and me looking here, and he says that we aren't focused. So we tried to look towards him and show that we're focused, and he just thinks we're shifty-eyed and he doesn't want to do business with us. So then we try looking off the other way and he thinks the cat's not enthusiastic enough. I mean, there's just no pleasing this guy. So then we say, no, mouse client, really, we're looking out for your highest goals. Look how we're looking up towards the future. I mean, you can imagine that we're sending him shiny brochures and we've had the marketing people make things look great according to what we think looks great. But if the client doesn't think it looks great, then it doesn't really count. So it can be really tricky to strike the right tone. So you have to research what the client finds attractive, and they might not find pictures of your cat to be attractive. So you need to be aware of that. In terms of researching your client, if I'm going to tell you to read one resource during this webinar, it's this resource. If you have not already read How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, you really must. It's one of the best books I've ever read in my life. Millions of people would agree with me. Even though it was written a very long time ago, I think that this classy, wonderful man has really given a good business encapsulation of empathy and how to use compassion. And honestly, if you are interested in other people, his advice are things like, learn their names, learn what interests them, learn what motivates them. That is really sincere and kind. And kindness is a really nice way to sell if you're trying to sell things. People know whether you're really interested in them or you're only interested in their money. People know. So be the person who's actually interested in them. People are pretty interesting, so you can do that. So, classic example, when we want a new job, we're trying to persuade someone about us. And it can be tempting to persuade them by telling them every single good thing about ourselves. So this guy has written down 500 pages of how amazing he is. And the hiring manager is saying, is this your resume or War and Peace, a very long novel? So research the expectations. If they have only asked for a 2-page resume, you must only give a 2-page resume. I have a CV. This is what I would suggest for everybody. You have a CV or curriculum vitae, which is everything you've ever done, every project. Have you worked in the Arctic? Have you worked on fish? Have you worked on rivers? Have you worked on coastal areas? Have you worked in forests? You put down every project that you've ever done in your life. That's a curriculum vitae. And then for each different job, or if you're on a company and you're part of industry proposals, for each proposal, you pick and choose the pieces out of your curriculum vitae that matter for that particular job. So not everything about yourself persuades everybody. So marketers are experts at researching their audience. Um, of course, that's pretty much the premier career in research. So there is a web page that I enjoy following, visualcapitalist.com, and an article that they put out at the beginning of this year was predictions for what they think for 2021. And one trend that they've noticed is that people who have the money and are buying things are more and more driven by authentic, value driven actions. So you can't just say that you're value driven. There was a lot of complaining over the last decade about companies greenwashing, and greenwashing means you were trying to appear that you were being environmental, but you might not have actually been that environmental. Now people actually want the evidence to show that you're actually following up your actions. And of course, Greta is demanding a lot of action from people. And so, in terms of persuasion, why is it that some people find Greta 100% persuasive and other people find her 0% persuasive? And all they seem to do is be angry and reject everything that she says and will do anything that she says you should do, they'll do the opposite. Why is that difference? So, why does she persuade some people and not persuade other people? I would say that the answer is in these 3 words, which I also had put up with the Dale Carnegie slide. So if you already are studying the environment and you already look at a lot of graphs and you were already reading various scientific articles about what's going on with the greenhouse effect and acidification of the oceans, then what Greta says seems clear and it seems familiar immediately because you already were on that page. Also, I don't think that anybody, whether they agree with her or not, could argue that Greta is sincere. This video that this still is taken from, she's speaking to the United Nations, I think, in this video, and her voice is just shaking with how passionate she is about this. And everybody in the world, I think, knows that she's passionate about the issues. And many people who are in charge of the money are, I would say, I call this the Greta effect. So environmental, social, and governance investment is, if you look over here at the Fidelity quote in the middle here, ESG and climate funds have outperformed conventional funds through 2020 and are likely to continue to do so in 2021. So we even saw the US government tried to sell off the Alaskan national parks for oil exploration, and the oil companies actually did not bid on them, and the Alaskan government was able to buy those back. We see other things that, oil investment funds are starting to divest themselves of more oil and invest in other technologies. And so Société Générale, same thing. They're saying the global green transition theme will continue to gather momentum. So obviously, Greta is persuasive to a number of people. So I thought it would be interesting to look at that in terms of what Aristotle has to say about persuasion and rhetoric, because one person trying to persuade another person about something began pretty much, before we were even human, right? Animals also can persuade. If you have a pet cat or a pet dog, I'm sure they try to persuade you of things. So according to Aristotle, if you would like to study what is persuasive, these are 4 areas. So ethos, pathos, logos, and kairos. So ethos is credibility or authority. So if you are going out with a proposal, let's just imagine for a minute that you're taking your services and you want to sell your services to your client. So the first thing is you need to be credible or authoritative. Of course, we don't all start out as credible or authoritative. So what can you do if you're new? If you don't have high experience or an important role? Well, if you're a sole proprietor, what you do is you get your friends who are more experienced and your mentors to throw their name behind you. Their credentials and their reputation, if they are saying that they believe in you, will start to tell in your favor. Pathos, interests, values, and emotions. So, marketers might try to sell to emotions like love, or classically those bank people who are trying to sell you savings accounts, or they're trying to sell you certain investments. They'll typically put families running on the beach, as if somehow if you put your money in this fund, your family will be happy and you'll be running on the beach. It doesn't have a lot of logic behind it. So if you're selling to technical audiences and you're trying to sell your technical skills, I wouldn't suggest the family running on the beach approach personally. I would suggest much more going for logos, reason and logic, data, logic, graphs. We love it. Scientists love that, right? Show us some evidence. However, you can, in terms of the pathos argument, you can think about what are the benefits to the reader or the benefits to your client. The benefits might be, for example, if I'm selling my technical editing services, it makes way more sense for an engineer who's worth $250 an hour to hire an editor that's worth $80 an hour, get the job done quickly. The engineer can go home and have dinner with their family and have a better report after they've eaten dinner, right? That's a benefit to the reader. It's not exactly running on the beach, but similar idea. So you can just picture that. Kairos, timing is everything. You can have the best proposal in the world, and if you're not offering it at the right time, then it's not going to be persuasive. One of the reasons that Greta is so persuasive is that it is a familiar idea that a lot of people were already thinking. So if there is plenty of ideas, Buckminster Fuller, he had a lot of the same ideas as Greta in the 60s, and it went a limited amount and then it stopped, right? Geodesic domes are really, really cool, and they're still really, really cool 50 years later, but only to a niche market. They're not every building in every city. Oh, somebody commented that Dale Carnegie is a great book. Thank you for the backup. It is. And having a black cat is definitely an awesome characteristic. Okay, so I wanted to go to these mirroring people here. So even in the dating world or in the business sales world, one of the things that you can do to persuade other people is to try and look like them. So you dress like them, and you even lift your arm like them. If they cross their legs, you cross their legs. If they sit forward, you sit forward. If they hold their hands like this, you hold their hands like this. It seems shallow and easy to do, but it's an important strategy. So just one sec. Yarrow, can you please give me your phone for a clock? Sorry about that. My son took our clock. Logical fallacies. So these are persuasive but unethical. I can't see it. So these are the reasons why people would not believe certain things. So these are extremely persuasive strategies, but they're not ethical strategies. So one of our colleagues at UBC, who I think is on this call, Jerry Vandenberg, he has a really excellent 20-minute talk on his YouTube channel. So hopefully you have your paper and pencil and you can write down the spelling of his name, Jerry Vandenberg. And he discusses logical fallacies in scientific reporting. So it's interesting. This visual here is from Excelsior College. They have some cartoon strips on this web link here that you can look up if you want to learn about logical fallacies. I'm not going to cover them extensively, but I want to touch on a few. So ad hominem is attacking the person. And so an example of that we definitely see with Greta, right? People say she's not credible. She's only a 15-year-old girl. She's 18 now, by the way. But when she was 15, the people who didn't want her believed and didn't want people to follow her said that you couldn't trust her because she wasn't credible. Another one that we're seeing a lot with COVID, I study COVID a lot because I just find it fascinating what's going on in different areas of the world. And one thing that has really interested me is that we tend to behave, I think, exactly like the people around us and exactly like what our local government says that we can do. So I happen to be in Nova Scotia, where they put in a mask law early on. They put in the emergency management law early on in March, and they keep renewing it. And everybody here is okay with that. And thanks to that, we have 27 cases in 1 million people. But I know other people living in other provinces, have completely different experiences and living in the States. If there isn't a mask law where you live, people can be very hostile to the people who do wear masks. I've talked to some friends in other countries that, they wear a mask and then they say that other people are not happy with them for wearing a mask. So, more than our scientific thought, I think we're extremely influenced by what the people around us are doing. And obviously, an appeal to fear is an interesting one. I was I'm really interested in France for the virus, because only 40% of people there apparently are going to take take the vaccine. Mixing up my V words here. And then I'm talking to an acquaintance in Paris, and he says, well, there's no reason for you to be afraid of the virus. You don't need to take the vaccine. It's just because you're afraid. So what's actually happened there, I think, is that the anti-vaccine people are encouraging fear about the vaccines. So it's interesting to see, these different logical fallacies and how they play. It sounds so compelling. So I'll use another of my friends from France. She's a dear woman, but not very educated, lives way off in a tiny little rural area. And so I wanted to find out if she was going to take the vaccine, because I know her mother is really old. And so the first thing that she says is, oh, there have been so many errors in the labs, it's terribly, they don't know what they're doing. And I thought, I don't think that's true, but I didn't want to challenge that right away. And she kept going. And she said, and Macron hasn't taken the vaccine. And if the vaccine was safe, Macron would have taken it by now. And then I looked up and, Trudeau hasn't taken the vaccine either, but I haven't heard anybody in Canada say that, interestingly. And then she said, and some of the government leaders got sick, so they didn't follow the rules and they didn't pay the fine. And besides which, the reason that they're immunizing old people is because they think that the vaccine's going to kill people. And if it's old people, they can just pretend it's some other reason. And I mean, everything that she said, I could see that she believed was very logical, but classic examples of logical fallacies, completely untrue things. And so the acquaintance in Paris, he was also really strong about the liberté égalité argument, that he had the right to make his own decision, and every individual should be allowed to make their own decision. So you can agree with that on the one hand, but you might not agree with that if you know about herd immunity and that we need to pull together for this. So it's very interesting dealing with hearing all these logical fallacies, and I'm sure you've all heard them recently a great deal as well. Politics also are presenting us with a huge number of logical fallacies every single day. So the reason that some of us are convinced by the vaccine researchers, again, for me, I've worked in a laboratory. I work with science reports all the time, and I find it clear, sincere, and familiar. However, the people that are reading memes on their phones and never read scientific reports think that the memes that they see on Facebook are clear, sincere, and familiar. So this is why scientists must learn persuasive techniques. And this is something for decades that has been said. Scientists need to persuade. We need to learn to talk to the level of the people we need to convince. And I also heard this argument a lot during the last American election, that they were complaining, well, Bernie Sanders doesn't talk to the people that he wants to elect him, or Joe Biden isn't using the right language to attract the people that he needs to vote. So there are reasons for it, and it's not necessarily about dumbing things down, although it might be about making things very simple, and we need to make them very persuasive, because if we just throw the idea, throw all we know about science at them, we try to explain very compellingly, it's more like throwing mud at a wall than anything else. There's already a wall and they don't want to understand. So every bit of scientific information we come up with, it's just like we're throwing handfuls of mud at that wall and it's getting bigger. A friend I was talking to last week said that there's a study somewhere that the more entrenched somebody is in a logical fallacy, the less likely it is that you can change their mind with logic. And so a French philosopher I was watching also was saying that he thinks in France now, and I think this also applies to Canada, we told people don't believe your priests anymore. The priests are in disgrace. But now we're just telling people to believe scientists, and the average person doesn't understand why a scientist would be any more correct than the priest. And all they know is that it's an authority figure, and the average person doesn't understand about peer-reviewed studies. They don't understand about double blind. They don't understand about all the ways that we know that science is true. So we need to learn different ways of speaking about these things. So here's an example from Facebook, not the only one we're going to see from Facebook, but so this is especially about speaking to the audience that knows you. So this is from a Facebook group I belong to on fasting. So this is already people who have been sick and helped make themselves healthy by fasting, and they know all the benefits of fasting. They know it reduces their inflammation. They know that it reduces their diabetes, all of these things. So she's speaking. She says right there at the beginning, her credibility statement, I've been working on a COVID floor in a hospital since the beginning of this, and I had COVID myself. So we know she's going to get scientific. Then she gets scientific. She's talking about ferritin levels and D-dimers and cytokine storms. And so to people that are used to thinking about their health in scientific terms, she's talking our language, clear, sincere, and familiar. Definitely believe everything that she says. However, if you're not a person who wants to hear about ferritin, has no idea what a dimer is, and doesn't know about cytokine interleukins or what CRP, see, because I know what those words are, I'm willing to look up CRP and LDH, right? If you know most of what's going on, you'll look up some of it. As an editor, I would like to tell you to never use acronyms and to always explain yourself. It's much more compelling. But because we know most of these words, we're willing to look up the acronyms. But the people who wouldn't know these words, so right where they see pre-diabetic, that might turn off some poorer readers. And then when we get to cytokine storm, a lot of readers would just turn right off there because they are just going to say, this post has too many big words, I don't understand, and I'm going to go read a meme that's easier for me to understand, and I'll believe that. So this is what we have right now in society. We have an extreme case of people that are not at all persuaded. They haven't seen any issues of COVID. They haven't seen the patients laying on their, stomachs trying to breathe. And then we have on the other side, people who are on the front lines, definitely know what COVID looks like and are completely persuaded about COVID. And these two groups aren't meeting. It's very hard for the people on the right to convince the people on the left. And meanwhile, a lot of the governments are people on the left who are more interested in making sure that taxes are paid than they are that people are staying healthy. So now here, I'm done with COVID for now. Some of you may have thought they don't want to talk about COVID. This is a really excellent example of clear, familiar, and sincere. So this is another group that I belong to, the English Language Teachers Publishing Professionals. And there's so many things I like about this post. She's selling an unpopular idea that doesn't have that many benefits to the reader, and yet she sells it so well, she immediately had a bunch of takers. So she starts off with, as Dale Carnegie would say, begin in a friendly way. Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year. And then she says she's speaking to ELT editors, so we know that she's talking to people that are English language teaching editors. And then if you are like me as a reader, what you do is you read the two bold-faced sentences and then you skip right down to the bulleted list, because that's what it's natural for us to do now that we're internet readers. So I read, okay, this is to editors, and oh, it's something about Uzbekistan. That's interesting and cool. And then right down, she puts downsides. This would be unpaid. So that is actually a really attractive strategy because she's saying right up front, I'm going to be honest with you, this is unpaid. She's not trying to hide it. She's not trying to sneak anything by on you. She's being very open, and that draws people in. Even if you have something that's not that attractive, it draws people in. And then she says, what's in it for you? So right away, she gets to the benefits to us. Your name would be on the inside cover and you'd be doing an act of kindness. So if you're an editor who has extra time and are interested in Uzbekistan, then you are going to go back and read the rest of the paragraphs. And obviously, a number of people contacted her, so this was persuasive. So how can we make these rules that I've just discussed specific to our technical audiences and particularly to sell your own services in the technical field? First thing, I have probably already said a few times this presentation, acronyms and unclear talk are not convincing. Okay. Nobody enjoys being confused, except maybe when you're in love. But other than that, it creates an unfriendly distance. Okay. Be familiar, be clear. It makes people feel cozy with you. So the mirroring of the body language, mirror their language. Don't put acronyms in that people have to Google, because rather than Googling, people will probably just surf away to somebody else. Now, having said that, I'm going to contradict myself right away. The Shipley Guide to Proposals. So if you are needing to write proposals with your work and you're struggling for a resource, I am working with some proposals writers right now, and this is the main resource that they would suggest. So you can write that down. And what they suggest is that you actually research the jargon that the client uses. So you could go to their webpage and you can find the words that they use to describe what they do. And what they suggest is that you can use their jargon, but you cannot use your own jargon if it's going to leave people outside that they don't understand you. And here's a funny slide I found this morning to make you remember, okay? So Poland says, okay, our name is Polska. And England says, I got this, Poland. And Poland's like, oh, close enough. I'll let you read the rest by yourself silently here for a sec. If you've gotten down to the bottom now, I couldn't read out this slide because I actually tried to look up on YouTube how to pronounce that Hungarian word for Polish, and I couldn't find it on YouTube very easily. So obviously, if you wanted to do business with Poland, you might want to use Poland's own name for Poland. Okay, so everybody's had this experience of somebody saying your name wrong, and it's not persuasive when people don't say your name right. Okay, so familiar formality of language in business. Something I hear surprisingly frequently is senior business people or scientists being annoyed by trainees coming in and being way too casual. You can't text message your bosses and your clients, and you can definitely not use text message speak. And a lot of them would also prefer that we not say, hi, Bob, and then launch right into your thing. So if you are doing business, then it behooves you to learn about business communications and business emails, and err on the side of more formal. So say a greeting like, dear Mr. Bobaloo, rather than just calling him Bob. End it always by saying thank you or sincerely or something. Sign it with your name, include your phone number and your email. Be formal. If you're more formal, people can be comfortable and move towards you. If you do something that they perceive as bad language, and as I started with, for some cultures, that's as much as looking them straight in the eye can actually make people move away from you. So you need to find their comfort level. And in Canada, at least, we love manners. So it's good to be more mannerly rather than less mannerly. That will draw people towards you if you are perceived as having careful, cautious manners. So another thing, if you're trying to sell to other technical companies and you're trying to sell your own services, is to look for ways that you align with the client. So values, service offerings. So for example, if you are a company that is really well known for your environmental reclamation work, if you're very well known for working with communities that you're working with, any way that you can demonstrate that you have values that you know your client has those same values, if you can show them evidence of having done that before, then that's persuasive. One of the books I'm working on is about proposals, as I said, and we're looking at case studies. And so nobody wants, the woman I'm working with, Lynette Lefsrud, works with a lot of different Albertan companies to get new technologies into the market. And nobody wants to be the first company to try a new technology, but a lot of people want to be the second company. So if you have something that you can already show that you did work in a certain location with a certain skill set, people are going to love seeing that documentation of evidence. So pay attention to where those clients are that you're wanting to do business with and what interests them, and then make your pitch in that direction. The same thing you should do with a job, any job application, right? You look up the company, you look what interests them, and you show how you fit with them. And so other things that obviously I think everybody knows technical audiences like: clear logic, facts, figures, and evidence, bulleted lists and clear tables and diagrams rather than solid walls of text. If you make a solid introduction and a sound conclusion, that's kind of like having good manners. It just draws people in because they feel comfortable that they know what's going to be going on in this document. And of course, the more authority and facts and evidence that you can show, the better. There is an excellent website, also worth writing down here, cewriting.org. And what they've gone there, it's civil engineering writing. They've compiled tons of reports from the industry and looked at how are experienced engineers writing compared to brand new engineers. And one thing that we find that new writers often think that if they put everything in the passive voice and they add some extra words, it makes them sound like they have more authority. It doesn't. People who really know their science and really know what they're doing use less words. And the nice thing about cewriting.org is that in a very scientific way, they have plenty of gathered data to show us this. The more experienced a technical writer is, the more simple they get and the more active voice they use. So for example, they might say, I will go and gather the data. Our team gathered the data. We did the processing. Is much more compelling, and it inspires more confidence if they believe that you are standing behind your information. And so now I have a little quiz. So I hope you have your pencil and paper out, and I want you to tell me, this is the last quiz of the presentation. So we're almost on time, Marnie. Are these techniques desirable for a technical audience, or are they not? So this is a general selection of techniques that you can find on the internet. If you go to the internet and look for persuasive writing, you'll find tons of suggestions. They're not all great for technical audiences. So is praise a good example for a technical audience? And how about opinion? Just telling your opinion. Exaggeration. So a friend of mine in Spain was saying that everything is the best product out of this world, most popular, highest selling product. That's hyperbole. Is that a compelling selling strategy for technical audiences? And how about using personal pronouns? Dale Carnegie would say it's great to throw down a challenge and say, you're the key to this entire idea. Does that sell well with your technical clients? How about commands? So for example, if you have a web page, usually after you give your contact details, you're asked to give them a call to action, it's called. So say, get on board and join us, or please email me to ask about my services. What about triples? So 3 points to support an argument. Would it be more compelling to say safer streets mean comfort, reassurance, and peace of mind for you, your family, and your friends? Or would it be just as good to say safer streets mean comfort for your family? Emotive language, Greenpeace and lots of environmental and vegan organizations really require emotive language. Is that good for your company to sell? And what about facts and figures? I kind of already told you. That's a good one. So here's the answers that I gave. See if yours match. So praise. Often a good approach, but you must be sure that it's sincere. If you're just saying, oh, you're such an amazing company, that's not compelling. If you can say, I loved the paper that you put out last month and how you discussed, and then you talk about the technical issue, that's going to create familiarity and friendship. Opinion is good if you happen to be a person people pay for your opinion. If you are the 2 years in the company person, probably nobody wants to hear your opinion, unfortunately. So you need to keep an eye on who you're selling your opinion to. Hyperbole and exaggeration. No, generally for technical audiences, that's not going to sell well. Obviously, for the meme-loving audience, that can sell really well. You know, the anti-vaccine audience and the people that can be easily swayed on Facebook. Hyperbole can sometimes sell well, unfortunately. Personal pronouns, yes, and active language, yes. And that can be a difference to what some people think about technical papers, but I say yes. Imperative command in moderation, as I said, those calls to action can be compelling. The triples rhetoric idea, I would say not if it causes extra words. I would normally get rid of that. Emotive language, I would say sparingly or not at all for most technical applications. And statistics and figures, of course, yes. And I'm going to end this on, you should, if you would be interested in learning some more about how people are persuaded, one of the most persuasive speeches is, of course, Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream. It's interesting to study the rhetorical techniques of writing that he used in writing that. And I would definitely say, look up that Dale Carnegie book and read it, or listen to it. There's audiobooks these days. You could listen to it on an audiobook. And just the final thought is that what counts as persuasive differs enormously from culture to culture. So it's always about paying attention to who's listening. So, you know, they say international marriages sometimes work more easily than marrying a local because you're expecting the international person to be different. And so people tend to be better listeners when they're expecting a difference. So maybe think about that this week with whoever you're trying to persuade, whether it's the person you live with or someone on the other side of the world. You know, listen to where they're coming from before you start talking. And I would love it if somebody has a question or a comment.
We did have a request to see the slide again with the technical audience bullet points. Is that the right one, Ian?
Yes.
Wonderful. Did you have a question about that or just wanted to see it up for a minute?
I just wanted to jot it down.
Okay, great. We do have some questions coming in, Krista. And
great.
I'll just scroll back to the first question here was about, we also have some comments. So I'll start with the questions and then we can go back and talk about the comments as well. This question is from Lisa, and it's, what about using fear in persuasive writing when the fear is fact-based and logical? Is that okay?
Yes, because that's crossing with fact-based and logical. It comes to what that guy in Paris was saying, you know, that I'm afraid because I want the vaccine or because I think people should take the vaccine. It sounds so compelling, but actually, is that fear? Is that just logic? So I would say, yeah, that's absolutely a good idea. Then it, you know, there's rational fear. So
just Ian made a note that being from Canada, but having been in the US for some time, he's been accused of using the passive voice too much down here.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. Our British roots, we certainly come up against that a lot of the, and so an interesting thing is with editing with technical papers. So a lot of the papers either choose to go with British English or American English. And the ones that tend to be more British based are the ones that are more likely to be insisting on passive voice. And a lot of the American scientific journals, and I'm not going to say all of them for either category, but a lot of them are more willing to accept the active voice. So there is a certain old-fashionedness to being Canadian or British sometimes.
And the next question is, could I please know if there is a good guideline or best practice to follow that helps balance using bullets versus writing sentences?
I would say that the best practice is we don't want solid walls of text all the time. And other than that, I would say it's a matter of taste. You know, some people are going to enjoy many more bullets than other people. So I think you need to really assess your, you really need to assess your audience, and you need to assess what's acceptable. So for example, I was mentioning scientific journal papers. In scientific journals, a lot of them would not use any bulleted lists whatsoever. But in engineering reports, you might see tons of bullets. So that's really going to be depending on what kind of materials you're writing for.
This is Igor here. I'm just talking out loud on this one, expanding on that one. I asked the question. I asked it because I once had a proposal that was all bullets. And I was trying to follow that logic, but then my boss came in, he didn't like bullets, and so I had to change. I never found that healthy balance between the two, hence why I asked the question.
Yeah, so in moderation, right? Because if it's all bullets and no sentences, it's disjointed and it doesn't feel like it's connected. So I would say you need a certain number of sentences to connect your bullets, at least.
Yeah.
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 Good, excellent point.
Hi there. I wanted to just mention I manage a academic conference that I receive probably 100 to 200 papers that I read through, and I am very surprised that in abstracts it's quite often there is not even a paragraph. It's like an entire A4 page of just text with no paragraphs, no headings, no bullets, no nothing, just text.
Because they think that they should fit the maximum number of words on the one-page abstract. We run into that with grant proposals as well. And I've done workshops with the NSERC grant proposal people, and they say, you know, one page doesn't mean expand the margins, shrink the text down to 10 point. And so in a lot of my other workshops, I really beg people to use white space, and that the understanding is in the white space and not in telling us more data and more details of your experiments and more. Yeah, choosing a small amount of things is very important.
Yeah, it's these are higher education academics, usually doctoral or professors, and it's quite astonishing just how many words and long words they can fit, and sometimes it's like such a simple sentence, but they have added every triple syllable word they can think of to expand the sentences along 3 lines. It's like 5-line sentences.
And you see, that's why they invented technical editors to help. Yeah, it's a definite issue. Anybody else have questions, comments?
Yeah, there are a few questions and comments coming in. And I know people may have to leave us to go off to their next meetings at 1 o'clock. I just wanted to interject quickly, Krista, and thank you for an excellent presentation. And also to thank everybody who stayed for the entire session. We still have over 100 participants online with us, and hopefully you have questions, and we'll be here for the next 10-15 minutes to field those questions. But I did want to just say thank you, Krista. And as you're heading off, and if those who want to stay and ask questions, that's great. Please feel free to add in the chat if you have ideas on topics that are of interest to you as well that aren't on this list. That's always informative for us in planning these sessions. We had such a great turnout today, and we are very much looking forward to seeing everybody again. So with that, I will just open the floor back up to answering questions. And if you have questions, you can stay and chat with Krista. You're welcome to use your microphones, turn your video cameras on. That will work perfectly fine. Or if you don't want to do that, you can also add them into the chat box, and I will be monitoring that. So thank you again, everybody, for your time today.
To this one from SSISC Claire about in environmental education and invasive species specifically, we're often speaking to 2 or more audiences in outreach. One is preaching to the choir, which is the easier part. The other is trying to convince others to care and find out more. How do we strike a balance with language and tone in social media posts and fact sheets? Is it best to have different resources for different audiences? Or is there a middle ground? So my first answer is probably different resources for different audiences, because obviously we need all the information about invasive species and the data on what's accumulating where and how many and how fast, and their transmission methods, and you know, all the environmental factors that are making the habitat appealing. Of course, climate change is changing those environmental factors. And if we look at a lot of the, I think, government initiatives, you know, about trying to not get people to carry firewood across the Alberta-BC border, for example. There's a lot of cartoons used by the government, which I think is helpful. And you often see that they're using bold fonts and they're using bright colors. And of course, if they put some laws in place, that's also extremely helpful. You know, our border laws about not taking fruits and vegetables across different borders are helpful. So my answer is yes, we need to basically, and I think that sometimes trying to tread the middle ground in that, you're going to end up not giving the technical people as much technical detail as they need. or you're going to end up losing the people who aren't keen on technical detail.
Can I ask a question about active and passive?
Yes.
How do you strike? I'm definitely in favor of the active voice for all the reasons you were talking about. But how do you strike a balance between it just sounding like, yeah,
Too
we did
casual?
this, then we did this, then we did this, and then we found this, and blah, 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 like that?
So yeah, as with the bulleted lists, there is sort of a balance that's good. And now and then, some passive language sentences do make it sound a little bit more balanced. There is actually a passive and active language indicator in some readability tools. I could maybe also put up an article about that. And yeah, so I think it's basically going with your ear.
I have a suggestion. What I often do with that is I try to find different ways of working. So for example, if you have a process that you're going through, don't try to write it all in words. You say, this is the process that we followed. And then you have a numbered list. And then if you can follow that up with a little, PowerPoint is wonderful for its little graphic art things, a little graphic diagram of a process or a process, depending on what it is. If you think, okay, you actually write it all first, and then I go back a second time and say, oh my gosh, this is like 17 lines of text. And how else can I phrase this? And you often find it becomes a list or a graphic or something like that. You don't try to do it as text. You find a different way.
Yeah, another professor I was interviewing said the same thing, is that sometimes even just talking it out orally, you can help figure out how you want to use the words better.
It almost sounds better when it's we did this and this versus I did this and this. There's this feeling of like, I don't know. I've heard someone that I was mentoring recently was sort of commenting on that. He's like, I don't like the I did this and this sound of things. I wish I could be saying we, but you know, in this case, it's a one author deal. Yeah. Anyways, if people had thoughts on that.
May I offer my insight on this active versus passive thing? I think it
Yeah.
really depends on the correspondence itself. If it is a briefing note to your senior management or a email from a CAO or the general manager to staff, then of course it could be a little more personal, like I, we, them, the general public, stakeholder, that sort of thing. If it is say a technical report, archaeological studies, for example, we may use the proponents, the consultants, or that's those sort of phrases instead of I, we, or them, or say any concerned residents or third parties to be the third person. While if it is a technical report which you have no control who is going to read it and who is going to circulate, you may want to avoid I, we, and use the proponents, the consultants, company XYZ staff instead.
Sometimes yes, but then another problem that we encounter sometimes, so when I was working at Golder Associates, an engineering company, sometimes there would be projects that might have lasted for 50 years, say it's a mine or an oil sands thing or something. And so if people never said, so example, it would be better to say we Golder Associates collected the data in 2012 at this site. And then in 2013, it might have been AMEC who was doing that same project. And so if they say which company did it, we can then follow that path back along the years when there's an issue. And when everybody has just put it in passive voice, I've actually seen this be an industry issue because nobody knows who did what at what time. So it can be, you know, they also say like legal departments love things in passive language because passive language never claims responsibility for anything. So it kind of depends, you know, as you say, if somebody's going to be reading it that you don't want to hold you accountable for something, then it would be important to put in passive. But if you want to be accountable for the work that you did, then you should say, I did it.
I guess it comes down to that credibility and sincerity. That is why active voice works, is because actually it's like your name is now against this. Whereas if you say a study was done, you're not saying I agreed with it, I disagreed with it, I thought it was a good study, a bad study. Whereas if you say I did a study, or my company did a study, or so-and-so did a study, it's almost like, it's like you're not taking authority for anything. So maybe that is why active voice is so much, we're talking about persuasion as a topic. That is why it's persuasive, is because you're standing behind your word.
Yeah, you're putting
And I think in terms of the project management, based on what Krista said, say dealing with data collection, that could be company A who did it 10 years ago, company B who did it 7 years ago. Then you want it to be specific. It is company A versus company B instead of I, we, them, that sort of thing. Now, even in some cases, a environmental assessment, for example, the proponent may change over time.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of like the bulleted list answer also, everything in moderation, I suppose. Oh, I work with lawyers a lot and they don't like active voice. Yeah. And so somebody's asking about, there's some questions I don't really have an answer to. Which scientific editor do I recommend for scientific articles? That depends on your discipline completely. It needs to be the one that fits your field. Storytelling techniques. So an interesting thing about storytelling techniques is if you're having trouble figuring out how to tell the story of your technical thing, it's really good, as I said, to do it orally first. Talk it out, whether that's with somebody in your house or, Zoom is great because we can access all these colleagues who have similar professions to us. I did that with this webinar. I ran it past some colleagues of mine before using it. And you can do the same thing, talk it out with people before you try to put it on paper.
Somebody was asking, how do you storytell while making a technical presentation and sound credible?
Starting off with that introduction saying, we at this technical company went out and gathered this data in May of 2018, and we found out that the fish were suffering from pollution. You tell the story about what you did and then what you found. And I mean, it's not like the once upon a time story, but it does follow a general thread so that there's a logical progression. There should be a map through your story. You should clearly go from one clear sign to the next clear sign. So headers can really help you with that. Think of your headers like a roadmap. So if I'm walking through the story of this technical study that you did, where did we start? Where did we go in the middle? And where did we end up at? So draw yourself a little map on a piece of paper and write down the little signs along the way. And that's the headers of the report that you're going to write.
And how did we change? Because the whole impact of storytelling is, how did we change from point A when we started to point Z when we finished? If you do, I find a useful way when I'm working with a big group of people is we put it on a whiteboard and we do it like the detectives do it, where it says, okay, so you start off with, okay, here's today's conference. And then if you go back, how did we get here? And then, okay, how do we carry on? And then you actually build up this little timeline, and then you can sometimes find like 2 key events that happened that changed everything and that turned everything upside down, or that confirmed everything. And then you story tell about those 2 things and it points it out to you.
Yes, excellent.
I belong to the Society of Technical Editors, and this is the first group, and I've been to like many meetings. This is the first group where I feel the passion for technical editing in the way I see it, as opposed to everyone else is talking about like how you get your Word document laid out and how do you do your numbering, and some strange where I'm thinking that's not technical editing. That's maybe more technical writing, perhaps.
Formatting, copy editing.
But this is about persuasion, is about what our job is, not the technical aspects of like, what software do I use to do something? This is about the message, not about like the little small things. And this group has been absolutely amazing. If anyone wants to connect on LinkedIn, if you have passion for communicating technical topics, sure, it's amazing to meet a whole bunch of people who are doing that.
Yeah, it's fun. I'm really pleased that we could have so many people come and join and engage afterwards. This is the really fun part, is having a little bit of time afterwards to share our questions and learn from each other. And I appreciate everybody's insights in the chat boxes. And I'm sorry if I'm slow to getting to them. There's actually quite a bit going on in this chat box, which is great. So thank you everybody for such great ideas. And it's wonderful to see that we still have 50 people with us almost 10 minutes after the webinar wrap up that indicates people want to be talking about this. Is an important topic. And this is why we're hosting these lecture series within our department, is it's valuable for all of our professions and in everybody's careers and lives to have this skills development. So really thank everybody for coming today. If there's no other direct questions, I suppose we can wrap up and look forward to seeing everybody again, hopefully at our next webinar. Feel free to reach out anytime with your ideas. And thank you very much, Krista, again, for your great presentation.